Welcome to the Regeneration International podcast.
I'd like to introduce another friend, a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Vandana Shiva. And Dr. Shiva is probably one of the most important activists we have on our planet. She's got her doctorate in quantum physics, but I think her real doctorate is in the natural world and the real world and understanding how natural systems work. She wrote probably one of the most influential books ever, The Violence of the Green Revolution, which woke everybody up to the dangers of industrial agriculture. She's been awarded what many of us will call the real Nobel Prize, the Right Livelihood Award, Sydney Peace Prize, and many others. She's written actually a lot of books, and her most recent one is 1% versus the oneness, showing how it was actually really less than 1%. A handful of billionaires really control most of this planet, and corruptly so. And it's a very important issue. And she is one of the original founders of Regeneration International and the global regeneration movement, as well as that being one of the long-time advocates of organic agriculture. So, Vandana, I'll hand it to you now. It's all yours.
Hello, Andre. Yes, Andre laid out the long journey I've had. I thought my journey would be in quantum theory. And since the most brilliant minds had spent a whole century puzzling about the quanta, it could occupy my life. But more of my life has been occupied by solving the puzzles of industrial agriculture and finding the path for non-violent farming. It began really with the farmers' protests in Punjab in 1984. That's when I wrote the book Green Revolution, or The Violence of the Green Revolution, for the United Nations University, because I was working on conflicts for the UNU program on peace and global transformation. But all the narrative was only about religion, just as much as the contemporary farmers' protests they're trying desperately to reduce it to religion. But this was really about land. It was about soil. It was about fairness and justice. And as one of the declarations of that time said, when you cannot choose what you'll grow, you cannot decide how you'll grow it, you cannot determine when the waters of your own rivers, Punjab, the land of 5 rivers, when that water will reach your field, because green revolution goes hand in hand with centralized control over water systems through large dams and irrigation, because chemical agriculture uses 10 times more water to produce the same amount of food. So there has to be a lot of diversion of water, a lot of extraction of water. And the fact that we today have a water crisis is so linked to the green revolution and industrial agriculture. So the farmers were saying, you can't decide the price of what you've grown. No other industry does the producer not decide the price. This is slavery. So they saw the green revolution as slavery and were rising against it. That was 84. We've had farmers rising throughout history. And in fact, if we wrote the true history of the evolution of societies, it would not be the history of kings and queens. It would be the history of people of the land, the indigenous people, the peasants, the farmers. At least in my country, for sure, you can't write the history without the 1857 uprising of peasants. The British prefer to call it the Sepoy Mutiny. No, it was much deeper. And the symbol was bread. People were giving bread to each other as a symbol of freedom. And for us, our bread has always been our freedom. So what was the Green Revolution? The Green Revolution was not green in content. It was not green in process. the word green as a color of the green parties of the world is a much later phenomenon. At that time, green was just a different color from red. And the big panic, of course, was the rise of China, as is still the big panic in the world. So the Green Revolution was a name given to really the continuity of war from Hitler's Germany. And that's what I found out when I wrote The Green Revolution. And since then, I've found out more and more and more in my book, Oneness versus 1%, that Andre cited, goes deeper into it. So here were the Allied forces, and here were the, Hitler's Germany, but the companies were working together. Standard Oil, the big American monopoly on oil, was supplying finance because they started the finance system too and the banking system too, and the pharmaceutical industry, but definitely the fossil fuel industry. And they were working with IT Farben, which was the cartel from Germany. And together they were working in Auschwitz. So the original chemicals were designed to kill human beings. And that they still continue to kill human beings is not an accident. So 1984, the Punjab crisis was erupting, but that same year, the Bhopal disaster took place. More than 7,000 people died when a pesticide plant of Union Carbide leaked. Since then, Carbide was bought up by Dow. Dow has merged with DuPont, and they've given themselves a beautiful name called Corteva. If you were to listen to their names, you would really think they're arising from the earth. 87, I realized that they were now wanting to own the seed. They said it at a meeting on the laws of life in Geneva, on the new emerging biotechnologies. Now, 87 there was no commodity that was genetically modified. The idea of recombinant DNA was there, but the scientists who evolved it said, we don't know the consequences. We don't know the ethical implications. We don't know the ecological implications. So we're going to put a moratorium. They stopped it. And then the poison cartel, as I call it, took this tool of moving genes across species and tried very hard for many years. And through this, a war industry, Monsanto became the leading seed corporation. And then they had to be bought by Bayer. So now you have 4 corporations. Bayer with Monsanto, Syngenta, which is already a merger of Ciba, Sandoz, AstraZeneca. And in addition to that, you have BASF, which was part of the original. And you have Dow DuPont, which is now Corteva, 4 companies controlling 60% of the commercial seed market. And that's what really started me on saving seeds and started Navdanya in the process. Now, 2 things started to become very clear in the study of the Green Revolution, as well as in the understanding of the patenting of seed and genetic modification, that there is this arrogance of capitalist patriarchs, which is the corporations. Corporations are the patriarchs. They're modeled on the image of a rich bourgeois man. And they behave like dominant patriarchs. But when greed and patriarchal domination combine, then new toxic things start to happen. And what they created was what I call a creation boundary. So nature has created the plants around us. And if Andre hasn't mentioned this, I want to mention to all of you, just the other day, a release was done, or maybe, the release was done and the book will be available on the 22nd. Brilliant book called Growing Life, which all of us should read. I see it as the most significant leap in our thinking. In Growing Life, Andre points out that the photosynthesis, the chlorophyll molecule in the leaf, which can capture the sunlight and take the carbon dioxide and turn it into carbohydrate, which Andre calls the molecule of life, and also in the process give us oxygen to breathe. That miracle technology is really the basis of life on Earth. And it is the reason we live on a planet, or we evolved on a planet as a species and have a climate that allows us to sustain ourselves. This wasn't the climate of this planet before plants came, before photosynthesis came. It used to be 290 degrees, 4,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. And the power of photosynthesis is what allowed the planet to cool to 13 degrees average, to bring the carbon dioxide concentration down to 270. And of course, we've messed it up because 200 years ago, coal started to drive the British Empire. And 100 years ago, oil started to drive the American Empire, with Standard Oil leading the whole thing. And so much of the history of this world and the geography of this world is shaped by oil. The entire country formation in the Middle East and the continued wars are really oil wars. Most people don't know that every chemical in agriculture is a petrochemical. All chemicals in agriculture come from the extermination logic of Hitler's Germany, of IG Farben. They were tried in Nuremberg. They were tried for crimes against humanity. And those crimes haven't stopped. Those crimes have expanded to be crimes against nature, because once you take war chemicals from the concentration camps and deploy them across the world in an agriculture that you call improved agriculture, modern agriculture, is basically war agriculture, then these chemicals are everywhere. And that's why 90% of the insects have disappeared. The biodiversity of our plants have disappeared, because when you put an external input, like synthetic fertilizers, when we feed the soil organic matter, and that is what regenerative agriculture is, the soil's brilliance and intelligence works out exactly how the mycorrhizal fungi will pull minerals from miles away from where they are and feed it to the plant. That intelligence of the living soil is what is destroyed, first denied by saying the soil is an empty container for pouring nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. But what is the result we have? Soils have been depleted of their nutrients. The figures for India are so clear. We have lost the ability to produce food because of chemical synthetic fertilizers. And 1 kilogram of synthetic fertilizers uses 2 liters of diesel. And it's created by burning fossil fuel at very high temperature. So when the Green Revolution was at its peak, the fertilizer use for 1 kilogram of fertilizer produced 13 kilograms of grain. By 2005, you needed you used 1 kilogram to produce 3.7. So your productivity of fertilizer has dropped from 13.4 to 7. And this is happening because the soil organisms are being destroyed. That's how the graph is going. And we still keep getting told we can't feed the world without chemical fertilizers. This is the reality, because it's the soil food web that really feeds us. How is the soil created? By taking that carbon dioxide of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, putting it back into the soil through its leaves and compost, through its liquid carbon pathway. Amazing research being done around the world. So regenerative agriculture really is understanding the regenerative process of the earth herself, because everything in nature is circular. Everything in nature is regenerative. Everything in nature is creative. And capitalist patriarchy has created this illusion that creation begins when nitrogen is made, nitrogen fertilizers are made and poured into the soil. And they deny the destruction, but they deny the creativity of the soil. They deny the creativity of the small farmers. of being more productive. All the data of the FAO is showing that 80% of the food we eat comes from small farms. Only 20% comes from industrial farms, which are occupying about 75% of the land. And if they have their way, they will destroy every forest for GMO soya, the Indonesian forest for palm oil, the Congo for palm oil, and more people will starve and we will have more climate havoc. My own research shows that 80%, that 50% of the greenhouse gases come from the full system of food production and distribution. The production is 14%. The destruction of forest, land use change, they call it, is about 20%. And then taking good food and turning it into junk, ultra-processed food that gives us chronic diseases. Packaging that's tearing down our mountains, our sacred mountains, like Niyamgiri. Mining for bauxite. The biggest use of aluminium today is not on automobiles. It is not aeroplanes. It is food packaging, which is why we get mountains. I did an archaeological analysis of garbage dumps one day and found 75% of what's there is either throwaway food or packaging of bad food. We are destroying the earth for industrial agriculture. If you just take the sums together, 75% soil and water destruction, 50% greenhouse gases, 75% chronic diseases, and all amazing new diseases we've never heard of, the Ebolas and the HIVs, all because agribusiness encroached into forests. We have another way of knowing nature, understanding nature, working with her laws. What are the laws of ecology in agriculture? Albert Howard laid it out so clearly. The first law is biodiversity. As he said, how come in Asia farmers could farm the same piece of land for 40 centuries? How come in Australia the Aboriginal people could farm a whole continent and not destroy it for 60 centuries? We are talking about the brilliance of the peasantry, of the farmers, of the forest people. And even these lines and separations are so artificial. For the Aboriginal people of Australia, the bush and the farm were one continuum. And they managed it so that you didn't have the kind of forest fires you have today. For the Amazon Indians, the forest and their farms were a continuum. For India, the forest and the farm was one continuum. Our forests were on our farm. And we are currently doing a study on the ecological functions of agroforestry and farm trees. And I'm so glad just before this session, you had Ranil and Tilak from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is one more country that is trying to make a transition. And of course, on everything where there's an organic initiative, there's attack. But all we have to see is when the supply chains of fossil fuels and fertilizers were stopped for Cuba, Cuba made an immediate shift to a regenerative agriculture. And in that shift, they showed that you can grow food without fertilizers, without fossil fuels. Most of humanity's history has been growing food without fossil fuels and petrochemicals. The future of agriculture is growing food without petrochemicals and without fossil fuels. The energy efficiency is so huge. 10 units of input to produce 1 unit of bad food in industrial farming. In industrial factory farming, 100 units of input to produce 1 unit of food. And if you were to add to that the ultra processing in the lab-based fake food that the Silicon Valley billionaires who are controlling the wealth, they're the 0.001%, they now are so hungry. They are so desperately hungry. They want our food. And regenerative agriculture has now also to include not just how we grow our food, but also how we process it. Because Bayer is already ready and saying, oh, this new emerging plant-based industry, they need a lot of raw materials of carbohydrates and proteins and amino acids. And we are perfectly matched to grow it because we do row crops. And we can mechanize even more. and supply them at scale. First, they said the soil is an empty container. Now they're saying food is raw material. And every step of distancing from the soil to the eater worsens the quality of food. That is why we call it a degenerative system. And the contrary is the regenerative system, in which we work more closely with the earth, more closely with her plants, more intensely with care, and the eater and the producer, the grower and the eater, are part of one food community, because food is a commons. So what the regenerative movement is showing, that when you feed the soil organisms actually produce more food for you. Johnson's work is showing you can increase photosynthesis 5-fold. Photosynthesis is converting the carbon dioxide and the sun's energy into available food. And not just food for us, food for all beings, because as I always see, food is the currency of life. Every being provides food to other beings, but more than that, every being has a right to food. We don't have a right to kill the butterflies and bees with pesticides. We don't have a right to kill the earthworms and the mycorrhizal fungi with fertilizers. We don't have a right to destroy ocean life with dead zones, as 90% of the fertilizer runs off into the oceans as waste. Our soils have increased their carbon content 100% in the last 20 years, just in our valley, in Doon Valley. And the nitrogen content in soils where we did not apply nitrogen fertilizers has gone up 100%. It has gone down 22% in the chemically farmed soils. But this is the issue, that actually what's being produced in these giant-sized monocultures with soil getting no nourishment is nutritionally empty commodities measured only in terms of their dimension. I call it Descartes' ultimate victory, the size and the weight. But food is content, quality. What's the nourishment in it? And the micronutrients matter. And the micronutrients are put in food through our collaborative partners in the soil. Our zinc content has gone up 14%, but the zinc has gone down in chemical soils by 37%. Manganese has gone up 14% in our soils, gone down 17%. 12% loss in iron. Overall studies are showing as much as 75 to 90% nutrient loss in industrially produced food. So it is time to stop measuring yield. It is time to start measuring nutrition per acre. And that's what we did in Navdanya. Because I was so troubled by what I saw in the state of Punjab, monocultures of rice in one season and monocultures of wheat in another season. And the more your monocultures are, the more chemically fertilized your plants are, the more vulnerable to pests they will be, more pesticides you will use. And now there's a cancer train that leaves Punjab for the city of Bikaner for treatment for cancer. That has been the legacy of the Green Revolution. And for our friends who will join from Africa, where the Alliance for the Green Revolution experiment is repeating the disaster that was created by Rockefeller already from the 60s in India, we need to connect both the costs to the earth and to farmers in India and the cost to the earth and farmers in Africa. And that's where I believe this People's Food Summit is so very important, as sowing the seeds of a new solidarity. Sowing the seeds of a new solidarity, not just between all of us across the world who have gathered, but a new solidarity with the earth. I've just written a paper for World Food Day on the living earth and climate change, because the same processes of photosynthesis that allow us to grow more food are processes that have already allowed the earth to cool the planet. And if we intensify photosynthesis, we intensify biological production, we intensify biodiversity, we draw down more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and cool the planet. But we do it while growing more nourishing food for people and for all beings. We have the common solution for both hunger and the climate catastrophe. but those who are hungry for profits and want to control our food system and tried to hijack the decision-making by hijacking the UN Food Summit. The UN Food Summit used to be in Rome, used to be organized by the United Nations. A country has one vote. The small island nations to the Himalayan countries each has as much vote as the Americans, which is why they have never been able to destroy the FAO on the basis of the one country, one vote principle. This hijack to New York, with it being headed by the Gates head of the Alliance for the Green Revolution project, Agnes Kalibata, and sessions by CropLife. CropLife is just the other marketing name for the poison cartel. They know no plants, they know no crops, they definitely don't know life, they're anti-life. And I would call the Gates Food Summit as the anti-UN, anti-food summit. Anti-UN because it has destroyed the very democratic fabric of international governance. And anti-food because it is destroying the very basis, the very ontology of food as the living medium of life, as the web that weaves the web of life. Food is what flows from the soil to the plants to us. As Howard said, health is a continuum from the soil to the plants to animals, including humans. We now know. We knew it in ancient times. We knew it through Ayurveda, the science of life. But now, in 10 years, emerging science is recognizing that the gut microbiome is a very rich biodiverse ecosystem. And it is connected to the earth and the biodiversity outside. We have 100 trillion fellow beings in us. We are only 10% human cells. And those fellow beings know when we pump glyphosate and Roundup and they get harmed. They know when we are feeding the same molecule of gluten from uniformly bred wheat and you get gluten allergy. Our native wheats do not cause gluten allergy. And even Monsanto tried to patent our wheats and we had to fight that biopiracy and they had to leave the patent. They wanted a market because every third Western person, every third person in an industrial agriculture food system has gluten allergy. It is the harm we are doing to food, is the harm that we're doing to soil and the harm we are doing to the gut microbiome is one harm. It's one violence, it's one war. What regeneration is doing is one piece. One common piece with the earth, all the amazing soil microbiomes, the amazing insects who know how to manage each other when we leave them to have a pest-predator balance, when we grow biodiversity so they can feed it. You know, I was not even working on insects. I was just saving seeds. But to save seeds, and we are harvesting 750 varieties of rice at the Navdanya farm right now. We have another 1,082 in our seed bank in Orissa, salt-resistant, flood-resistant, drought-resistant rices, which since 1999 we've been distributing after every cyclone, every flood, the tsunami. So it's not the case that we don't have climate resilient seeds and we need Gates and we need Bayer and we need Monsanto. They just pirate these seeds. This is piracy of climate resilience, and then they patent it. But piracy has been the mode of colonialism. They cannot. They pretend they are the creators, but they are just the pirates. In the first colonial time, they called themselves pirates, pirates of Penzance. Now, they pretend to be philanthropists. It's a new form of piracy, taking all the seed banks of the world. Gates has taken control. That's why we must have community seed banks. They would like to take control of agriculture. Gates has one agriculture model for the whole world. We have to create thousands, building on our traditions. In the mountains, we have to have terraces. In the desert, we have to have lots of shade trees. Every part of this planet is diverse and it thrives on diversity. The laws of agroecology, the laws of regenerative farming our diversity, and the law of return. That's what Howard recognized when he came to India and found how rich the farming was. And he said, how can I improve this? I must turn the Indian peasant into my professor. We have to turn the earth, her processes, her biodiversity, the peasants, into our professors. And leading this has to be indigenous peasants, small farmers, and women. Women, because even when the men were dragged out into the mines and the plantations, the women kept growing food. Men were pulled into wars. The gardens kept growing. The bread kept coming. And the history of food is the history of women. The history of seed is the history of women. The erasure of nature's creativity and the erasure of women's creativity is capitalist patriarchy. But no matter how much they deny it, they cannot extinguish it. And this is what is helping the regeneration today. We are in a very, very exciting moment. We are in an exciting movement because precisely at the time where the poison cartel and the billionaires and the World Economic Forums are riding triumphant, they think their systems are totally collapsing. Just two simple little good news is today, which we should celebrate on World Food Day. Bayer threatened Mexico, which had decided it would not accept GMO corn because corn is their heritage. They are the country of corn. They gave us thousands of varieties of corn. Bayer challenged it. They appealed. The Supreme Court just ruled unanimously that they will not accept GMO corn because it undermines their heritage. And the law on corn as a heritage, which is a cultural law, came into play. Food is culture. How we eat differs in every part of the world. The second really good news I read today was, we have an amazing network of women who take care of women's health and children's health. They call Ashas, which also means hope. And as is typical of poor Mr. Bill Gates, who wants to sell his software everywhere, he with World Bank created a program where the women would be given smartphones and would be documenting all their visits. And at the end of it, these women said, we are spending all our time reporting to you and spending no time looking after the children. The babies are dying of hunger. Women can't be looked after. We want to give care. We don't want your gadget. And they had a campaign to return the phones, and the digital empire was told no. This is a contemporary satyagraha against digital empire of nutrition. Satyagraha is Gandhi's word for the force of truth. Satya, truth. Agraha, the force of truth. What we are working with in regeneration is the force of truth of the earth, the force of truth of the seed, the force of truth of the soil, the force of truth of the sunshine, the force of truth of photosynthesis, the force of truth of 100 trillion microbes in our gut, the force of truth of our ancestors, and the force of truth for our future generations. This is why it's an exciting moment, because all we have to do is continue to do the right thing. And those castles in the sand are going to collapse. Those satellites will have no one to send signals to. So keep taking care of your garden. Keep taking care of your seed. Keep taking care of your community. And in solidarity, we will go seed by seed, garden by garden, farm by farm, community by community, country by country. I send you loving wishes. Thank you.
Well, Vandana, always such wonderful, inspiring words. Yeah. So I'd like to just have a question time for the last part of this session. And I'd like to start just asking you about what I regard as one of the most important books you've written, Health Per Acre, because for me, when I read that was a game changer. Instead of just talking about kilograms per hectare, to actually talk about the actual nutrition produced per acre or per hectare instead of yields or empty calories. And in that book, you showed that diverse smallholder farms could feed 2 Indias. Would you like to talk on that? Because I think this is a really important issue we need to change the paradigm of.
Yeah. So when I studied the Green Revolution, I realized 2 things. One, that food production wasn't being increased. What had happened is a system of biodiverse agriculture. In Punjab used to grow 250 species of crops till the Green Revolution rice and the Green Revolution wheat was forced on them. But because chemicals caused lodging, the warlord was given the task of changing the plant to be resilient to chemicals. And therefore they reduced the straw, which is the food of the earth. It is the food of animals, yeah? They took away the biomass that feeds the regenerative cycles. And basically all they did was increase the partitioning. It wasn't an overall increase in the biomass of even one plant. So they took a system, reduced it to one plant, took a plant, reduced it to one part, and said, we grew more. No, there was not increased biomass. There wasn't increased food production. It was just a higher ability to sell more chemicals and a higher extraction of a commodity. So they basically reduced a food system to a commodity. And I noticed this in 84. So I started to then say, but our farming systems have so much diversity, and I'm going to measure biodiversity. So I evolved from 95 onwards. I started to go farm to farm, and we did 200 farm study on the biodiversity-based productivity. Yeah, biodiversity-based productivity, and we called it a new paradigm for food security and food safety. And here, these 200 farm productivity. What we did later, when I was very privileged to have a colleague who volunteered with us, a doctor who's just become a surgeon, and Dr. Vaibhav Singh, he dropped into my office and said, I want to work with you. And I said, in your background? He said, I'm a doctor. I'm an MBBS. I said, what are your passions? He said, math and public health. I said, I got the perfect task for you. You will take the productivity tables of the biodiversity and convert them into nutrition tables. Now that's a lot of work. Only if you love math and you love public health can you do it. So what we did, we took the productivity data from the biodiversity-based productivity and then converted it into nutrition tables. And let me just share with you. Let me give you one example. So a comparative analysis of one farm. So we have millets, we have Mandua, Jangora, Gehet, Bhat, these are all local names of millets and indigenous beans. And they are producing a total of 14 quintals. The paddy is producing 12. So overall, it's producing much less. But then you break down into the individual proteins. So the proteins are 338 compared to 90 in the case of paddy. The carotene, they're after golden rice in Philippines. We sent it out in the year 2000. They first brought it to India. We said, no, you don't need this. There's so much source of beta carotene. Beta carotene is 2,540 in these biodiverse systems, just 24. This is where the malnutrition is going. It grows from the soil, but also from the farm that your plants are not biodiverse. A Sikkim study, 9 units of production in a mixed farm with maize as one component. But the maize is 4 units in the 9. They take the maize, make it a monoculture. They take what was in a mixed farm, 4 units, make it 5 units in a monoculture with lots of chemicals. But meantime, you have lost 5 units of protein crops and nutritious vegetables. So I call this the monoculture of the mind that is so blind to diversity that it cannot really see the system that it's growing. And then we extrapolated on the basis of the data to all of India's farming. We took averages of these 200 farms, and said, if all of India cultivated with biodiversity, how much iron would we have? How much protein would we have? And that's where we realized not only can we feed 2 times India with the level of malnutrition we are facing, but with rich nutrition, and in some cases have enough for 5 billion people. So if the world shifted to first more photosynthesis and the molecule of life, second, biodiversity intensification and the biodiversity functions of plants rather than the petrochemicals destroying those biodiversity functions. Third, more justice in our food distribution system, more fairness, more diversity in distribution. We can literally increase farmers' incomes tenfold, increase food availability to double. We could feed 14 times. We could feed 14 billion and retreat from the Amazon, retreat from the Indonesian rainforest. And we don't need to destroy the planet for the hunger of corporations. The earth has very limited appetite and a generative appetite. Small peasants have generative agriculture. Communities have generative economies. And this amazing paradigm shift that we are all making is unstoppable.
Thank you for those wonderful comments again. I have a comment from one of the participants, Doug Ravel, and he says we need to live in harmony with the soil food web. Nature is circular, nature is regenerative, and nature knows how to grow nutritious and sustainable foods. So I know you've been talking on that. Would you like to just elaborate on this, which I think is a very important comment, and the concept of oneness?
The concept of oneness, the concept of regeneration, and the concept of circularity. So the concept of oneness shows that you cannot separate the soil microorganism from plant health. You cannot separate plant health from our health. And you know, when they say plant-based foods, well, all foods are plant-based. All. It begins with the green leaf. Life is plant-based. So it is about oneness, and the flow is the nutrition. The whole issue of balance. You know, the new sciences are teaching us, the science of living systems is teaching us that living systems, from this microbe, the cell, the molecule, to organisms, to the planet as a whole, Gaia as a whole, are self-organized systems. And in self-organized systems, what you have is harmony. And how is that harmony maintained? Because every organism is intelligent, and it knows how much to take and how much to give. It knows how much to give because it cares for others in relationship. And it knows how much to take because it knows how to keep toxics and overdoses out. That's why every living system has a membrane. And that is the reason I have been against globalization, which tears down the membrane of national economies. It tears down the membrane of local economies. Every living system has membranes and an exchange. They are not insular. The third very important point is circular. So things circulate. You know, I think, Andre, the next step we need is how from the soil, through the plant to photosynthesis, and back from photosynthesis back to the soil is a circular economy of life. And we're just touching the surface of it right now. It is such an amazing circular economy. Now, just like the reductionist monoculture of the mind only looked at the commodities that go to the market and then said we are growing more, the economy itself, by being extractive and only looking at commodities, treated extraction as growth. When by disrupting the circular system, you are depriving the living system of its growth. You're depriving the soil of its fertility and growth. You're depriving the plant of its growth. You're depriving the rural communities of their growth. Why are rural communities sinking into debt and poverty? Because of the extractive system. The current industrial agriculture model is based on extraction by high costs of inputs. That's the first extraction. That's the debt. The second is extraction in terms of the share of the farmer that would stay with the farmer in a fair economy. So-called free trade is legalizing unfairness and injustice. The third is every step in the industrial system is an extraction of the resources of the land, of water, of genes, of seeds, of biodiversity. So this extractive system cannot see circularity. In fact, it must rupture the circles in order to pull out more. It sees giving back to the soil as a waste of organic matter. And look at the literature. In my land of the sacred cow, they're now talking of bullocks as waste animals. Can you imagine? Just because we've got industrialized now, so dairy can be industrialized, but the tractor needs to get rid of the bullock. But in India, we just like the grain and the straw was part of one whole biological system. The male and the female in every offspring is equally valuable. So we fought feticide, female feticide, because they wanted to get rid of they created technologies to get rid of female fetuses. Now they're creating technologies to get rid of male fetuses in animals. I've done studies on the factory farm system. They kill male chicks when they're born because they won't lay eggs. They just gas them to death. The violence of the factory farming system is then extrapolated to the non-violent relationship of pastoral economies and economies of a balanced relationship between cattle herders, the land, the soil, the animals. So this is another place where we have to work. So the circular economy is the economy of the future. And the circular economy is not Coca-Cola drowning the planet in Coca-Cola bottles and then sending it to waste treatment plants. Circular means it must circulate in the life process. Anything that might get recycled into new raw material for the new profit chain is not circularity. Circularity is a living process. It must fit right back. I think Ranil was saying it in terms of the million years of fossilization of carbon. You can't equate it with the living carbon in the tree. And I think it's these ontological, like I say, if you want to eat meat, eat meat. You don't want to eat meat, don't eat an Impossible Burger that tastes like meat. They've tried to feed me as a vegetarian, chicken that looks, soya chicken that looks like chicken. I say, I don't want it. I'll have my dal, please. So I think it's a moment of truth to ourselves because we are what we eat. So circularity is the flow of the nutrition of life. And that's why I say food is the currency of life. And the food revolution is the revolution of life where we will ally ourselves with the laws of the earth. And the power of this planet and the power of Gaia is so much bigger than the power of these pathetic billionaires. That is where we must cultivate our own inner strength and our hope.
So, talking about that, I've got a very good question. I actually think, Tasha, I think you stayed up all night looking at this. So she says, I live in the California Central Valley, essentially the belly of the beast of industrial agriculture. How do I increase the reach of my voice to be heard by our state and local officials? And I think that's a really important question.
Thank you, Tasha. And one of my last trips before lockdown was through the Central Valley. I was giving lectures in Northern California and then in Southern California. And I had to drive through the Central Valley. So when you say, how do I change systems? I think there are initiatives right now in California where public health people are connecting to the food issue. Because now doctors realize it begins in food. All chronic diseases begin in food. And I personally know so many cancer specialists who've given up their practices in the city and started organic farms. And they say, come here for treatment. Outside New York, there's a famous doctor. I know there's the most famous Italian cancer specialist, runs an organic farm now. So work with local public health people. The second is during lockdown, where people lost jobs. People started to create gardens and solidarity groups, including in the poor communities. I think particularly in your area, you have a very, very unique solidarity to create, because you are one of the largest population of farm workers who are treated very unjustly. And I think a new solidarity between small, because there's always an attempt to divide. You know, the 1% is always ruled by divide and rule. And they will pit, you know, they'll say, oh, the small organic farmer is your enemy. Yeah. Now, we have to have a small organic farmers, farm workers, public health people, those feeding poor communities, because I was reading in England, for every supermarket, there are now 10 voluntary feeding programs, because most people can't even afford to buy the subsidized and artificially cheap food of the supermarkets. People can only get food because there's a solidarity of food kitchens and soup kitchen. So this solidarity that is emerging through hunger is another alliance, a solidarity emerging through justice to farm workers, and a new solidarity. You know, when in that trip, I also I was invited by the mayor of Los Angeles, and he said, my biggest problem is homeless people. I said, don't see it as a problem, see it as them creating help for your city. All you have to do is design places where they can work with the soil, heal the earth. They'll be climate warriors. They'll give healthy food. They'll have shelter. And instead of having a problem in a mega city, you'll have a solution to all the mega problems. And because you're in California and in the belly of the beast, you know, the belly of the beast is a good place to take small steps.
Well, Vandana, I just want to thank you so much. Your words have, as usual, been so inspiring, so informative, and the amount of positive comments we've got is unbelievable.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Andre.
And thank you, Vandana, and thank you, everybody, for being here.
Hello. I'm Alexis Badenmare with Regeneration International and Organic Consumers Association. And across the bottom of the screen, you've probably noticed that we have a ticker, Sign the Regeneration Pledge. Let your nation's leaders know you want them to invest in regenerative agriculture. regenerationinternational.org/pledge. And so this is a simple pledge that you can sign. It's a way of you joining into Regeneration International. So go to regenerationinternational.org/pledge and you can join the movement. We also encourage people who represent organizations to make applications to become part of Regeneration International. In past years, we have had in-person conventions globally. In Asia and Africa, in Latin America. We want to do that again very soon. And so please sign up, get your organization involved, and hopefully when we do a future in-person event, we can meet one another in person.